Welcome to the Stop Digging Community Podcast, powered by the nonprofit A² Lamp Groups. I'm Christina, a joyful founding board member since 2014. Your truly unique self-development journey begins today with the first step. Stop digging.
Welcome, listeners. We're ready for another great episode of the Stop Digging podcast, and we're excited about our topic today because I'll share some statistics about it, but it's something that probably 87% of people in the workforce experience. And so we have an amazing person who's going to share her expertise and give us, all of us, including me and our co-host Chris, some great insight on what we can do to make our presence and the presence of others better and on whatever team we're serving. I'm excited about it, and I wanted to share a few things about high-performing teams. That's what this show is all about, and work cultures that get established in a company through teams. And that's important because, as our guest has indicated to me, top-level work culture is great. The nitty-gritty work of a work culture happens at the team level as people interact on teams. And if you're wanting to change your work culture, you got to start with this, with your team family, and people need to see what it looks like. So let me share some statistics about that, because we're looking at global teams, and our 2025 theme this year is global. So let's talk about that, because I looked at some statistics here. We've got a 2018 study that says, and this is before COVID, 62% of all workers serve on remote teams. Most of them have at least 3 cultures on their team. And only 22% of the people who host these intercultural remote teams are actually trained in it. So I found that interesting. That's prior to COVID. In 2021, Harvard Business did a study and showed that 89% of all white-collar workers interact globally, specifically on global teams. Now, this is right around COVID, so that's not surprising, but that has maintained itself over the years. 2024 SHRM, that's SHRM. For those of you who don't know, that's an HR association that specializes in educating people and companies on HR. Workplace culture perception and engagement is shaped by the ethnic and national cultures that are fostered as diverse within a team. And I thought that was interesting because there's very few studies necessarily that specifically focus on that. But if you have all the same people on your team, the same kind of people who all think the same or come from the same background, you are missing some valuable information. And also that shapes people's perception about their work. So the study itself indicated that teams that are more diverse, the people on the teams actually feel better about the work that they're doing when they feel heard on the team. That's in 2024. In 2025, McKinsey found that work teams perform 35% better when they have culturally diverse members. Again, it's maintained. And in 2025, BDO showed 8 key characteristics of high-performing teams, and high-performing teams were 23% more profitable, 81% improvement was shown in absenteeism, 94% of the respondents reported feeling more productive at work when they felt connected to their coworkers, and one of the key factors of a high-performing team is that it's diverse, culturally diverse. This is super important, and this topic here with our guests is super important. 2025exec.com, last statistics here. Leaders are woefully trained for global leadership and are particularly lacking in cultural intelligence for effectively managing conflict, multiple interpretations of goals and missions, and developing leadership from within teams in a cultural context. So we're always about leadership and team training and education and business and startup. And that being said, we've got an amazing person who's going to give some insight. And so, Chris, This is you introducing our amazing guest and starting us off.
Thank you, Scott. That was interesting hearing all the different pieces about culture and the importance of it. And we have an expert here today. And I'm very excited about it because I just love leadership development and cultural development. And I have experience at high performing teams, and been on teams that let's say, are not so high performing. So now we have an expert. We have Faith Clarke. Faith is an organizational and cultural teamwork specialist dedicated to helping business leaders create values driven, inclusive environments where people can belong and can deliver on business and social impact goals. As a Caribbean immigrant and mother of neurodistinct children, she's passionate about inclusion for BIPOC and neurodistinct individuals. I have to admit, I had to look up what BIPOC was on ChatGPT, so thank you for that. With a background in computer engineering and doctoral research in teamwork, Faith uses a systematic, high-touch approach to build strong teams, improve operations, maximize productivity, and increase revenue. And who would not like some of that? Faith is a published researcher, Amazon bestselling author of Parenting Like a Ninja, which I'm also fascinated by, a former host of the Peak Performing Team podcast. She contributes to publications and delivers workshops across academic and professional settings in the US and UK. Welcome, Faith.
Thank you so much, Chris and Susan, for having me. It's always interesting both to hear the research and then when you talk about me, I'm like, oh my goodness, what are you talking about? But anyway, it's lovely to be here.
Look, I don't know if you could tell, but I'm genuinely excited about this. Literally, I've had so many work experiences. And one of the things I'm always trying to do is I'm always trying to build a great team culture. And I'd like to know from you, when you're called in to work with these teams, where do you start? What do you do first?
So I'm going to answer that. But I just want to, as I'm listening to the research and I'm listening to what we've said so far, I want to distinguish a couple of things. And
Yes.
so diversity is just difference, right? Whether it's difference in identities or ethnicity or cultures, as we've seen in the research. And I know that we don't have effective teamwork without proper inclusion of diversity. And so toss the words around, but I just want to say that if the workplace culture isn't infusing inclusion, the diversity doesn't benefit. You don't see the benefits that you see in the research that you described. And I also want to differentiate between workplace culture, which is the habits and practices and rituals and meaning making at work. And what are we about around here? And the fact that when people are from different cultures, we bring that diversity. Or me as a Jamaican, I bring that difference in my own personal meaning making into the workplace, and that adds flavor and value, right? So because we're using the same word, sometimes it can be interesting as we're dialoguing the difference between world cultures and a certain kind of cultural competence when you're talking about world cultures and the workplace culture, which is a thing that needs to be designed to serve the values and mission and vision of the organization. So, no,
Thank you for making that distinction because you know what? In the business world, once a buzzword hits, everybody jumps on it and then it loses or changes its meaning without us knowing. And what you said is valuable. I think none of it matters unless you've ever served on a really bad team or you've been in a really bad work culture. And I say that because I think all three of us have been.
of course.
And there's nothing worse than being in a work culture where your own culture is misunderstood, sidelined, or even maybe disrespected. So I would love to hear more about that. And maybe we can stop and double click on some of the word meanings again as we go through this episode, just so we're not just using buzzwords when we're talking about this. Thank you so much, Faith.
You're welcome. So I'll just go into, Chris, your question as to where do I start? I tend to feel that everything is a people problem. It doesn't often leaders think, oh, if I had more resourcing, if I had new grant or funding or product selling better or a new widget. But it's really that we have people that we are inviting into a mission that need to work together. And if we're not tuned to how do we help people do their best, and then how do we help those interactions work well, then everything falls apart. So anything, I start wherever it is that there's the most pain, because we're much more motivated to address pain. Retrofit is extremely expensive, but most organizations don't want to look at organizational health when they're not limping. And often it's an issue of conflict. So something happens and the people can't manage anymore. And then it gets to a place where the conflict is starting to have engagement issues. People are leaving in cases of different business models where people have choice about where they're working and how they're working, and teams start to lose quality talent and things like that. And then somebody might ask me, here's a thing here. Or when early in the pandemic, there's managers feeling like they can't do their work and keep people on the same page. And so then I'm invited in to have a conversation with the leader just to think about how can we do that differently. So it could be an extreme pain point, usually a conflict, or in the rare but beautiful cases, I'm invited in the design phase. We're bringing on 2 or 3 new team members. We got extra funding to do this project. So we're hiring. How do we do this well so that we honor whatever it is that we say we're about? That's usually the place I start. And I start with the leader, even though I think lots of movements have grassroots groundswell. There's often that I'm working with a team and the leader may not be on board, but I can work with the team. And there's a way that when people start to feel heard and start to feel like they can work together, it inspires them to function together well in ways that invites the leader into a different approach.
Yeah.
How important is that, the leader being aligned better to actual teams interacting?
Yeah, I think it's essential. And I think fundamentally, when I think about peak performance, when I think about essential ingredients like inclusion and belonging, which I think is a part of how you get people to click together and to hum really well, to interthink, as some of the research says, the leadership strategy has to be different. So it's not just important that the leader be on board, but the leader has to lead differently. And the sage on the stage, was in academia for a while and did a bunch of teaching, and we can talk at people, we can have power over people, but that's not effective for true transformation. And so if we're not able to shift our leadership so that it's power with, if we're not able to shift into collaborative models, if we're not able to shift into shared leadership models, into models that inspire and give ownership of the mission and the vision of the team to everybody, then it won't work. And so it is this, how do we co-create a different way of leading? And how do we allow that leading not to just sit in one body, but to be a part of, in really high functioning teams, you can see leadership shift in the group. Like you can see this person is leading right now and there's a handoff without even words. And this person is leading right now because the team holds this collective knowledge. Team cognition is in the research. The team holds this collective knowledge of how we do what we do and where we're going. And then we pass around whatever needs to happen as based on what's happening in this moment in time. Everybody knows what's next and who's on next, and they can intuitively do that. So the leadership style has to change to allow that to happen.
Yeah, like I said, I've been very fortunate in my career. I've had some really great leaders, and I always say my shortcut for it is so the leader goes, so the team goes.
Absolutely.
So and what I tell people, one of the things I was asked, because I did some very technical training in medical device, just so you understand my background, is I would tell people that the people ask, are leaders born or are they made? And I said, look, everybody's a leader. At the very minimum, you're leading your own life. Now, whether you're doing it well or not is not for me to judge, but everybody has that capacity to learn. And I found that many people who have more influence don't necessarily have the title of manager or leader. And right. I think that's to your point of people being able to take over pieces, right? It's not burden that should be on just one person's shoulders. It's shared. And the really effective leaders understand that and are willing to, share the importance of the team culture and transporting that across the entire team. So I think, what you're saying it resonates with me. You can see me smiling.
Let me ask you this, because I'm going to put my leadership cap on. Mm-hmm. And my first thought, let's say I'm an executive leader and I got this team and I'm frustrated beyond all belief. When I heard you talk, what I'm going to hear is, how can I trick my people into having ownership so I can take the burden off of me? That's what I hear as a leader. So when you're talking about leader shifting, are we talking leadership style, strategy? What's shifting? What's going on there? Because when you hear, again, interpretation.
Yeah, and when I hear that interpretation, what I think is values misalignment, right? That when the thought is, how do I trick my people? Then I'm like, oh, okay, either that's a statement that indicates that leader's values, and I start to probe there. What's the organization's value, or which values are we talking about when we want to improve this team? So people call me in for whatever the issue is, and I try to go back to what's your medicine. And I tend to say this a lot. What's the medicine that you offer into the world? Or what's the medicine that you're known for or you want to be known for? Because I can tell you Faith's perspective on how to get your team going. But you already have something that's good and effective for you that's working somewhere else in how you implement whatever it is that you do. That's often codified in value statements. And so if these are the things that you actually believe that are good for you, then what's missing in your leadership in terms of these values? So let's say that you say, I don't know, something blase like integrity, and you've implemented integrity in some specific ways. And so where are the integrity gaps in your leadership or in your team that's causing whatever it is that you're saying? And so when you ask the question, where do we start? I'm a qualitative researcher. The human story is so rich with stuff that the starting point is wherever people are emotionally ready to start. So sometimes I tend to lean into values a lot. Sometimes that's an issue of strategy. But if I'm to be absolutely honest with you, even when I can see this is an org redesign and strategy issue, the people don't have the capacity for that. The leader does not have the capacity. You're adding 15 items to my work list. There, no way am I going to sign up for 30 extra meetings and whatever. So it's not a strategy issue unless people have the stamina for that. But often there is something that people are already doing right that I can take and leverage in the area where there's a gap and say, can we implement this thing that you're doing here over here? And that starts to build capability and resourcing, which then hopefully leads to the bigger issue of misalignment within the organization that's causing the team not to function well.
I like what you said there because, when I put my leadership hat on, when you're in charge of or frustrated with a team that's not performing or doesn't have ownership and you feel the burden, you're filling in for people that keep quitting, or you're constantly trying to get people to do what they say and think, you can become so frustrated that it changes your mindset, where you're like, why can't people just do their job? You start not liking your own people. And I've seen that as well. And so what I loved about what you said was being able to shift their mindset to what's working. Because when you said that, respect doesn't come out of criticism. Respect comes out of what's working. And that sounds like maybe the first step is to figure out what's working right and what value, when you're talking about values, is. Now, are you talking values for the leader, for the company, or for the team when you were
Well,
talking?
hopefully they're all the same, right? When they're not, then that's when we start to have little fragmentations. And so I tend to highlight even the aspirational values. It could be the organizational values that are not really the leader's values, but then I pull in these organizational values and invite the leader into how does this really fit you? How do we build that relationship between this idea that's working over here, using this value here, and you and your leadership style? And I think here is a good point just to mention that the 80-20 rule it works all the time. I think of the results comes from this 20%, and part of effort and part of how I use the 80-20 rule is just to recognize the system. 80% of the solution is not in individual behavior change, system change. 80% of the solution is not in any particular blame or any particular person, but in the development of an environment that causes people to operate differently. So you will find that people are in another organization, another environment, and they're doing fantastic, and then they come to your team and it's sucky. And I ask, what's the environment here? And often the leader is not responsible for the environment. The environment was inherited. So whatever the larger contextual environment, the environment in the broader space, that's impacting people. So my question is always, how do we design the environment? And that's where culture comes in. How do we design the environment that helps these people feel good and thrive? Because the work, instead of micromanaging every single detail, and people can get really tight about accountability, which I agree with, but we want to hold people accountable for every little thing. Where did you put the key? When really people's lack of attention to whatever the task is about the environment that is in place, that's creating some of the fallout. And so back to the leader, it's like, how do we influence what this environment is, that can create the performance you want?
And I just love what you're saying. Anyway, I just love it. I think one of the things that I always think about is we have values, right? And we try to align values, but sometimes we have different beliefs about those values. And I think that's where the inclusion comes, because we can all say, I believe in integrity. And I'll use one that I've used as an example. So let's say we say the organization says communication. Oh, that is the most important thing. And I say, great, we should get together once a week. And my manager says, once a week? I was thinking once a month. So now we believe that communication is a critical factor, but our belief or our behavior around it is misaligned. And then you talk to somebody else and go, once a week, I was thinking we should have a stand-up meeting every day so we're aligned. And so now you have three different, now whether it's cultural or personal or whatever you want to call diversity, we have a value that we say we share, but our beliefs around it are different. And I think these are kind of things that you're talking about is getting that specific kind of thing, saying, hey, this is working well. Our weekly meeting is working well. Our monthly meeting is not. Our daily meeting is not working well. How do we improve it? I think these are the kind of the tactical pieces that sounds like you analyze. You come in and go, what's working well? Oh, this is working well. How do we replicate that? How do we build more strength around that?
So and I'm looking at all the touch points. Like it's not just what's working well, yes, but I'm looking at how is everything working, because if you can just squeeze something into one, if something is working okay, and we can move okay to feeling good, I'm like, oh, this is amazing, right? So yeah, we don't need an extra X time with Faith, but if your Slack channel is the place where people are actually engaged, then I'm like, all right, so how are we designing this interaction to increase this feeling of belonging and inclusion, or increase the engagement, or whatever it is that we've identified? How do we stretch that a little bit and get more juice happening here? That then we can start to expand out into the system. How do we design every environment so that we get more, but not get more by extracting? We get more by making the environment more nourishing, that therefore it helps people produce more.
I love when you said nourishing, because work has changed so much. And with all of the technology, the remoteness, people not staying in jobs for more than 3 to 5 years with a company as a standard, everybody's mobile and shifting all the time. And sometimes I feel that a lot of the issues that come to pass are where we just feel drained, whether it's the work hours or the pressures or the tasks or the projects or the people. Like you said, most people leave jobs because of other people. And they also stay if they feel connected with somebody.
Right.
And that is so draining. And people want to work and feel like they matter. Yeah. So when you say nourishing, let's break that apart a little bit. Tell us some of the things that nourish people that you would encourage in a team that is just burned out.
So I have to offer a contrast here. I'm going to answer the question about nourishment just by leaning into the idea that we're all nature. And if we're nature, like trees are nature and birds are nature and humans are nature, then we know what nature needs to help it thrive. And the work The business structures, the organizational cultures and systems that we've inherited have not been systems that have been built on human thriving, and they've been built on human extraction. And so the exhaustion and the burnout is embedded in the spreadsheets and the performance review, and it's so tied into the DNA of how the businesses and organizations have been designed that it takes a certain kind of eyes wide open. As a leader, you have to know that when you step in, that wow, by default this thing is going to lead to burnout. That is how work. And like I looked up the definition of work in the dictionary just for fun because I'm a word nerd, and I was like, there was no definition of work that had anything joyful in it. It was all, there was no definition. And part of what we're actually doing when we're saying how do we build nourishment in is want to do something that has not been done well anyway so far, by using the systems of work historically that we've inherited. So we do know what humans need for thriving, and we are implementing those things in other spaces, slightly better in the educational system. Maybe we're looking at it in the health systems. So work is a place where humans need to bring their whole selves to be effective. What happens in the old system is that you strip people down to caricatures of themselves and say this caricature needs to produce. So when we're starting with what nourishes people, it's how do we allow people to be their whole selves, which comes to this question of culture, meaning world cultures and all this kind of thing. Because when we've centered only one way of being human, and what we've said is all these other ways are inappropriate. Color. I remember when I first went to work on Wall Street, there was a commentary about which colors I could wear to work because it was not professional. And these definitions of professionalism are really very specific definitions of how to be human, when there is, in nature, biodiversity is the way that nature thrives. Mm-hmm. And so, what are the ways that we can let people be their full selves at work? And some of the things that I invite leaders into, and again, that's why earlier I mentioned that a team is the place to implement, because when you're asking these questions and a person immediately says to me, Faith, how do I scale that? I'm like, wrong question. Wrong question. We cannot be looking at that question and thinking 2,000, 5,000, 8,000 people. You build the skills with 5 people. So if I have a group of 5 people, how do I help my 5 people be their full selves? I tend to start with things like personality stuff, just because how do we allow ourselves to be known? It's not safe at work to let people know who I am, because then I can be punished for some of what people find out about me. I am, as Faith is a time fluid person. I am from Jamaica, and my relationship to time is different than what I've seen in many spaces here. And I feel judged when I'm showing up late. People say that I'm not respecting their time. And I then judged that person by saying, you're not human and compassionate. I was doing this other thing by spending more time with this human that needed my time. And we have all this judgment against difference. So part of what's nourishing for people, allowing them to be able to be their full selves. What's nourishing for people, understanding that we moralize difference and tuning into when we're doing that and releasing that, so that the differences can be on the team and be just variations and variety and not judged. What's nourishing for people, quality relationships. Have had so many conversations where the relationships at work create this feeling of belonging, and then the people, like you say, leave in 2 or 3 years, and then the person that's there no longer feels like they belong because the key relationships aren't in place. And what often some of these elements that help people feel nourished at work are the responsibility of the person to create for themselves. And part of what I say is that if this was like NFL or something, it's not the people they're not just doing runs and drills. They're also talking about food. They're also working on entertainment. They're supporting people's families. There's a holistic approach, flawed, but holistic approach to what is required for an athlete to show up. Why are we not thinking what's required for these 5 people to actually show up, meet their core needs psychologically and physically? And so I don't know how much of my background you had seen, but I have an adult son with autism. And a lot of my own thinking about this has been shaped not just because of the work I do, but when I think about in this body, having kids who have disabilities, being primary caregiver, when I show up for a meeting at 9 o'clock, I want you to know that I've slept 3 hours between 2 and 5. And so that level of knowing who I am and then supporting me, there was a team I was a part of and I was consulting with them. Every time I showed up, somebody handed me coffee. And it wasn't coffee from the coffee machine. She made it at her home. And she handed me, she says, I know you've likely not eaten. Another team member looked at me and said, I see your blood sugar dropping right now. Here's a fruit. There's a way that when we know each other, then we offer care to each other based on the knowing about what a person's really real life is like. It's part of what brings nourishment for a team.
One of the things that I try to do every time I'm on a new team is invite people to lunch for just that very reason. I was just like, I want to get to know people. I want it to be outside of work. It's not, we're talking about work the whole time, but what's going on with your family and these kind of things. And I think it's important to people remember that, like you said, people have different things going on in their lives. I think there's one point you said, and I think I have this thing that I say is everybody's got their own area of brilliance, and expecting someone to be great in your area of brilliance is really unrealistic. So accepting them for where they are in their area of brilliance. The perfect example was I was on a team and the project manager was getting mad at the developer, filling out the project schedule and this kind of thing. And I remember our boss went and he goes, that's not his area of brilliance. He's the coding master. Like, this guy would show up at 2:00 in the morning, and if the line went down, and he'd fix it right away. Go, that's his area of strength. Asking him to do this project management stuff is just, it's not his thing. It's not his area of brilliance. It's not where he wants to work. He gets his joy somewhere else. And so remembering that about people, and maybe not putting expectations. I expect you to not only do that, but also do this thing and this thing and this thing. I think it's a much better way to work together. And I see all the pieces I like, but just remembering this team that I was on that was considered a high performing team, and how different everyone was, but we celebrated everybody's differences. Right. Lots of different cultures, but it wasn't, I don't know if that kind of played into it. It was just, we were all human beings, and we all just operated differently on different things we were good at.
And I think that when you, whether formally or informally, when you know that you can co-create the work, in other words,
co-create the work, that's beautiful phraseology. Sorry for interrupting you.
No,
but lovely.
It's no worries, because when my differences are not going to be the thing I'm going to be judged by, but just acknowledged, then our own, and as a team we hold the goal, then it's like, how do we figure this out? We can't leave Faith. I was a coder, but I'm not going to document my code. I think I'm going to document it. I think I'm going to write all the things down afterwards, but I'm not. And when you know that about me, then it's like, how do we get this product out knowing what we know about each other? Mm-hmm. So instead of it being a static job description, which I like, job descriptions are fine, but when a new person joins a team, then there has to be what do we know about all of us? And then how do we co-create this work so that we all offer what we need and everything is met and we get the job done?
Speaking to the nourishing part too, what you just described is also nourishing, because if you're a master coder, but you feel like a failure all the time because you're not doing this spreadsheet and we don't know what you're doing. It takes the shine away from what you actually do.
Absolutely.
Because you feel like a failure when you're actually not. So a lot of it's about perception too, allowing people not to fail, but allowing people to be who they are, but find a more organic or natural way to meet the needs of the team in a way that doesn't detract and make them feel like there's something wrong with them. And speaking to the intercultural, ethnic, religious world culture, what I heard you describe, and not to be religious about it, but it sounded a lot like grace, giving people a little grace, just a little bit of gray room.
Yeah. One of the core needs that we have is to be competent. And so I do always look for people want to be demonstrating their competence. People want to contribute, and there are barriers to this. The form that people need to fill in, the barrier to demonstrating their competence, is it how they're treated and biases in the workplace? That's the barrier to demonstrating their competence. But whatever it is, as a leader, my job is part of the environment, part of the creating environments that nourish is removing the barriers to need fulfillment. And one of the core issues, one of the core features of an environment that centers belonging is that the meeting of needs is just a part of the culture. It's embedded in the culture. And so what are these barriers that stop people's competence from showing? Because it is absolutely not that people aren't competent. And when we start to interpret people's differences as judgments against their character or their skills, that's fundamentally what's off in the situation.
Oh yeah, that can go toxic even, right? If you're like, oh, this person.
Immediately.
Hello, friends. Thanks for listening. A² Lamp Groups powers this podcast. Their memberships are tax-deductible donations that directly support their work developing people and organizations. But just for you, they're offering podcast listeners a special 40% off coupon code to join. Your benefits as a member include additional resources, perks, and access that you can use all year, including an additional 30 minutes of bonus podcast content for every episode. Simply use the code 4listeners at checkout. That's the number 4, all caps, listeners at checkout. They also are giving our listeners free gifts to use now. Go to their website, asquaredlamps.org/podcast, and download your free My Success Course of Action worksheet. There is no cost, registration, or sales pitch involved. Just click it and save. Use it to work on something significant to you this month, maybe even something that sparks interest from today's podcast. Then click to join our free but private Stop Digging Podcast LinkedIn group, where the conversation continues between you, the hosts, and our guests. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with your friends. And now, back to the program.
Well, and sometimes a team can do all of the things that you're describing right there, which is great, but who's also meeting the leader's needs? When I work with leaders, a lot of times they talk about vulnerability, but there's a sweet spot for leaders, because if you share too much, you become less of a leader. And if you share too little, you're also less of a leader. But there's that sweet spot where you let people know who you are and show up, but the team sometimes forgets to honor or maybe recognize the competence of a leader. One of the things I work with leaders on too, when I work with leaders, is that once they become a leader in anything, they've worked really hard to get there. Everybody criticizes them and everyone thinks that they can be and do their job better. And it's so frustrating. So what you're talking about, just a little bit of grace, a little bit of care.
And that's the thing that we have to recognize, that the culture and the environment wasn't built to nourish. So what you're describing is something that when I'm working on organizational culture, I'm going to design that. We are automatically going to be fault finding as people move up the hierarchy in hierarchical models. That's built into how the system was. Do we want to design something different? Do we want to have something different? How do we create something that's collaborative, that's built on affirmation, that's built on honoring and integrating difference? And then that's not making the leader, the person on top, to be knocked out and picked off, but making the leader a part of the team. So many leaders that I've worked with are not a part of the team. Mm-hmm. They're not the team relationships. They're not a part of the team. It's still a hierarchical model, as much as they're talking about breaking the hierarchy and stuff like that. And it's like, we have to be eyes wide open, old system, new system, and knowing the elements of old system that's so built in that you automatically fall into it. And so that leader, and it's hard, right? You can be creating it with your team in a context that's not creating that. And I encourage leaders to create it and create the haven for themselves, knowing fully well that people are looking from the outside are only going to look at what are your deliverables and whatever it is. But that leader needs to create the team or to cultivate an environment where the team meets the leader's need as well. Because I say your people. If we're talking people first and your people, if you haven't included yourself, I have a little comic strip I wrote called Faith Includes Herself. If you haven't included yourself in your inclusion efforts on your team, then this won't work.
So I've got it was interesting. You brought up something about being a sweet spot. I fully believe that the whole self, even for the leader. And when you do that, you allow other people to bring their whole selves. So
Right.
like, I don't know for me if I would say there's a sweet spot. It's like, this is my whole person. And if you're confident in who you are, then you allow other people to be their whole person. And it might be different from the way you are, but I'm like, look, this is me. I've been on the planet for a while. I'm married. I got kids. I know who I am. I know what my strengths are. I try to improve on things that that I think are important for me to improve on. And then there's some other stuff I'm like, that is not something I'm interested in. I'm not interested really necessarily to grow in that thing. And you're good at it. And I'm going to live in that space. My whole thought process though is, remember, when you're talking in conversations, like I'll use that as an example. When you share, people feel like you're sharing. If you bring your whole self, more people feel they can bring their whole self. So I think for me, when I'm on a team, I try to bring my whole self. I'm like, this is who I am. This is what's going on. I know who I am, and I'm here. Okay, guys, let's pull together. And what's our shared vision? What's our goal? What's our shared goal together? And then I like to ask them, what exactly do you think is your part in that goal? And then we can talk about it that way. At least that's my approach. So I'm curious as to what you think about that.
I am a strong proponent of really deep vulnerability as the way to build trust. I have a 4-stage model for team development, and I tend to say that at the first stage, we're building trust, and at the second stage, we're building trust. And at that third stage, we're building trust. And when we hit that
fourth stage,
it's like we're building trust. Like,
it's juggling. No, it's building trust.
And I definitely believe in leadership vulnerability as a strong representation of that. What I also know is that in organizations and teams with a lot of diversity that haven't done their work to deconstruct biases and the implicit hierarchies that come with difference, and so have not built the skills to understand power and privilege, then a leader with multiple marginalized identities, so women, people of color, like that, depending on what the intersection of identities that you have, we have to understand that those people are at greater risk for repercussions than people with more powerful identities or more privilege. And so what that means is a woman leading a team being vulnerable is in an environment that hasn't done its work. That vulnerability, I am exhausted, or whatever it is that is shared, is easier for that to be seen as something to judge this person's leadership by, and therefore the risk is greater. And I think that part of moving forward in creating a different kind of environment is to be eyes wide open about how these things operate. So we can't pretend that they don't. Years and years ago, I was going up for a job in a Fortune 500 company that one of my best friends worked at, and I was going to be on her team. And she said to me straight up that you can't have 2 Black people on a team without one being the good person and one being the a bad person. She just looked and she said, and I don't want to jeopardize our relationship because one of us will be the bad person on that team. And I think that people who've had this experience are the experts at what happens, right? So I wasn't in corporate at the time. She is a Black woman. I took her word for it, and I took my services elsewhere. And so there is our eyes wide open to the risk and to the resourcing issues that show up when we lean in and say, yes, we're going to create this different kind of culture. And then the clapback can be severe. And we've seen this in a lot of spaces. I've seen a lot. And it's why one of the things I tend to say to people that diversity without working through your inclusion stuff is tokenism. I've seen a lot of large systems put a variety of people representing diversity in the leadership positions, and then they are the first people they fall under, the bus drives them over. And it looks like it's lack of competence, but it is an issue of the systemic nature of how this works.
One thing that strikes me is the difference between what you described that you do in helping create those spaces to be able to show up 100% is that, and what you described as a diversity project system, that strategy that gets put into place, is that people are very savvy and they know and feel the difference. They did a study that I found interesting, is that when minorities, women, or people of color were applying for jobs, when they were less likely to apply to companies whose websites said that they had a diversity program, because when they went to their website, it didn't feel authentic to them, because they would look and they would see people of color on the board, one or two, or maybe a woman or whatever, but they weren't trustful of that because it was a system, not a feeling.
Yeah, the environment is pretty low trust right now. And so when you're designing, you have to design knowing it's low trust. It's like when I was in the classroom, that there are students who came into the classroom who'd been through so many other systems and been through so many other schools, that their trust in education and in teachers was very low. And your approach to that student keeps that in mind, that what I'm doing here is rebuilding trust. And in the organization, part of what I say to leaders is that when you're building trust and people start to believe you, oh, you're actually different from other places, or you're actually different even from my manager in the other unit of this same place. When people start to believe that, then trust in fractions wound even deeper. So it becomes essential that it's an important part of the work. It's not, your work is not just creating the widget. Your work is not just building your tooling so that you are already always on the cutting edge. Your work is practicing how to people well, and constantly practicing how to people well, so that you are building trust constantly. You know how to repair trust infractions when they happen, and you are able to cultivate interactions that help people to be their best. And that's just the essential.
Can I say something here real quick? So you hit something on for me, and this is one of the things that I try to implement, and I think I learned this from other people, is catch people doing things right. Sure, you go, oh, wow, you did a nice job on that. If you catch people doing things right and you give a genuine appreciation, then when things maybe go a little sideways, you have built up like a bank, right? You can say, okay, look, you've been doing this right, but this one we got to work on. This isn't working for the team, and like, how can I support you, or whatever you want to say. But I think, to your point, like it's never ending building trust, because if you break that trust, what I say is that people who have a lot of self-worth, right, and you break their trust or you make them feel like they're not appreciated, they go, I'll find another job somewhere else. And the people who don't have that will go, oh gosh, I'm afraid to move, I'm this kind of thing. And so you end up with a lot of people who let's say we say are not performing at their peak, because they're just afraid of making mistakes and that they're going to be called out on it. And I always like, just catch people doing stuff right. Point it out, say, thank you for doing that. Appreciate you doing that. And I think those are the ways, for me, at least, that I think that you can build some of that trust up for when inevitably things you don't agree on.
And when you mechanize appreciation, it can also not ring true. So what you're really doing when you're catching people doing things right, what you're really doing is just having a good human relationship. You're listening well, you're paying attention, you're affirming, you're having gratitude for the things that are working, you're having honest conversations about what's not working, but you know that you're on the same team. In the workplace, it's hard for people to actually own the sense of we are on the same team. It is a sense of every man for himself. And so when you're cultivating, we're all looking through the same lens, we all love each other, and we're moving forward, even though we're different, then you have the opportunity for correction, for repair, for shifting, without people feeling extremely vulnerable that something's going to go wrong and that's my job, or something's going to go wrong and that's my reputation.
Mm-hmm.
I have something really practical that I want to ask you, because people don't just transform overnight, right?
They
So
don't.
when you're building this high trust team, high performing team, highly diverse team, highly inclusive team, when mistakes are made, when a judgment is made, when a word is had, when a team conflict happens, what are some things that you try to help a forward thinking team institute into that? Is there an apology? I know what the current HR systems do. And to be honest, most people will tell you if you have a conflict on your team, don't go to HR. So let's hear the people first side of how do you train a team while they're learning to overcome some of these bumps?
Yeah, so I try to, you know how a sports team watches videos of other teams doing the things well? Yeah, I try, people need a video. People need a script. It's not a script with like actual words, but it's people need to know how they want to be in situations before they're in the situation. It's the worst time in the middle of a conflict to then figure out how to be. There's always a fallout, even when we're trying to do things. If you don't already know how you want to be when there's conflict. And so often people are saying, hey, Faith, help us to have conflict prevention or conflict. But I'm like, there is going to be conflict. You must have eyes wide open that there will be conflict. And you shouldn't be trying to avoid conflict. You should be trying to engage in conflict and practicing engagement in the little conflicts. I want to have the meeting at 8. I think it's better to have it at noon because the California people, how do we navigate those things? And so with a team, my first step is always before the conflict, what's conflict? What kinds of conflicts can show up? What do we mean by restorative? So I talk about restorative conflict navigation strategies. What do you mean by restorative? How do you think? How do you want to practice? What are some of the skills that you might need to be practicing to get to not get up in your feelings when somebody disagrees with you? And what are the resourcing for that? And that I'm doing when everybody's feeling awesome. Everybody is, yay, we're so happy to be here. Then that's when I'm going to have the conversation about conflict. Because really, doing conflict navigation well is about recognizing that othering is the primary reason we have conflict. That's the Othering and Belonging Institute. They're in Berkeley. Where are you all located? But they're in Berkeley, California, and their research is just our tendency to put a person over there and make them other is the fundamental issue with all conflict. And so I ask people to navigate, how do we other, and what's the way to listen well, to put the person, to make the other us, how to shift that perspective. So
When you're
they're listening practices and reflection practices and centering practices and decentering practices just to get everybody's point of view. There's practices to interrupt a moment when people start to have feelings and say, hey, I have some kind of feeling, and then allowing that to have some space to center how that person is feeling above whatever it is that the leader was talking about. Practices like those, just to get teams accustomed to being uncomfortable.
How do you feel about apologies? Like when you described somebody judging you for always being late and you feeling that, how did you feel that judgment? If it was verbal, how did you respond? And how would you train somebody else to respond? If you feel that someone's judging you because you wear too many colors, or you're late, or you use different language, or you have a nose ring, how does apology or confrontation, how does that play
So
in?
on the team, you have to first give permission for the confrontation, for the apology, for the calling out, or whatever it is that the leader has to set up a culture where that is accepted. Otherwise, the person who may be asking for an apology or maybe saying, hey, I felt some kind of way or whatever, is putting themselves at an additional risk to do that. So let's assume that the team has already agreed, this is how we want to be. We want to honor difference. We want people can show up, blah, blah, blah. Then I show up in all my colors or whatever it is. And I feel somebody saying, that people are going to judge. People are going to think that you're not serious about your work when you're wearing all these colors and all these bracelets, whatever they may say. Then part of the practice does need to be able to say, I think we feel around here that we can all just show our differences. And whether that's a one to one conversation, I invite people into being able to have brave one to one conversations with colleagues just to say, hey, this is what we agreed as a team. And I felt some kind of way when you said that. And it just didn't feel like it honored what we had agreed to. And being able to say that is a part of the team culture. And in the case where a person feels like I might need a third party, go discuss it with another colleague, again, that you trust, that also agrees, and get a three-way conversation going. So I felt uncomfortable when you said it, discuss it with a manager or somebody you report to that's already on board with this approach if you want to be supported. But I do believe that on teams, whether it's apology or call outs, there needs to be agreement as to what the approach needs to be. And it was specific to the apology word. Like somebody apologized to me recently and I accepted it, but I didn't feel any different. And I asked myself, what was going on for me? And the particular situation felt to me like I needed a grand gesture. I think what people need for repair will vary from moment to moment and person to person. And that goes back to listening. If you are on a team with people, then you need to ask, how do I make this right? What's going on? Know that this thing has happened. How do we repair this? And that might be, I'm so sorry, and that's it. But sometimes this is what I'm going to do in the future to make it different. Or this is how I'm going to help restore the loss of your reputation. Or this is how, whatever it is that the person who feels harmed is experiencing as a result of the situation. Sometimes the apology needs to have some kind of repair built into it for it to make a difference.
It's fascinating. When you said like having a let's call it a protocol, since I'm an engineer. Since I'm an engineer, so I always tell when I was a team, I said, look, if something I'm doing is bothering you, I would appreciate if you came to me first, and then if that doesn't work, then let's get someone else in. But for me, I would expect it that you would come to me first, because I had that one time where I was at a company and somebody I was working with, he skipped over me and went directly to the manager. And the manager was one of those not, let's say, emotionally intelligent guys. So he was, you're doing it wrong, like that kind of thing. And so I took him aside and I had a conversation. I was like, look, if you think I'm doing something wrong, come to me first. And then if you and I can't work it out, then we'll go up the ladder. And I think that's important for people to understand, hey, this is how we are going to operate. And I just want to share one more story because it made me laugh, because I was just thinking about it. You're always going to have conflict. And I have this thing where I said, don't send the third email, which is people send an email and you read something into it, and then the third email gets sent, and all of a sudden it starts blowing up. I said, don't send the third email. Go and talk to the person, pick up the phone. And I had this because I was having a conflict with one of my coworkers, and I thought what was an innocuous email asking for a request, and then it escalated, and then I went, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is spinning out of control. And I went to my manager, and I said, look, I'm not sure how to handle this. I'm new to the team. What should I do? And she goes, that's interesting. She goes, they're like 3 cubicles down from you. Maybe you should just go talk to them. I'm like,
Yeah.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's uncomfortable, Chris.
Oh yeah, I admit it was uncomfortable, but it taught me, if you're having like that moment, literally taught me, first go talk to the person. And then if you can't resolve that, even though it's uncomfortable, then go up. And I understand I'm a big personality and these kind of things, but it didn't occur to me. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm new and I don't know what to do. And it's just like, why don't you go try talking to them first? I'm like, oh, geez.
And part of the inclusion is to recognize that not everybody is an extrovert or has a big personality. And I've talked about this in previous episodes too, is that I'm a very bold, direct person. And I assumed in my early career that when you get into a meeting and you say, are we in agreement? Do we have anything more to say? Do you have any more input? And everyone's, we're fine. Let's do it your way. That meant agreement and ownership and onboardness. And what it really meant, as I discovered, was that half the people didn't feel safe in the organization anyway. And maybe half of those were introverts and would never have spoken up in a meeting anyway,
Right.
no matter whether they agreed or not. And so, like, the inclusion part is, like you were saying, are you an introvert? Are you gay? Are you Christian? Are you a woman? Are you a man? Are you a person of color? Are you from another country? Do you speak two other languages if English isn't your first language? There's so many different factors that come to play, and we make assumptions about what agreement is and what rules are.
And we make those assumptions based on our own frames of reference. And that's why one of the first things that I did eons ago was just note that teamwork is teaming. There's a whole bunch of different skills, and then the working skills. And that a team needs to be intentional about working on both sides, the teaming and the working. And so this question about, Chris, that you're saying, come to me first, not as an assumption, but as a team agreement. When stuff happens, when, not if, how do we want to be? And what are we? So go to the person first. Let's have an agreement on that. But like when we come up with these things at the once a year or whatever, or once every 5 year, whatever, when you have staff turnover every 6 months to 2 years, these agreements have to be refreshed. So I invite teams into, there has to be time that's separate from the work time for the teaming time. How are we being here? How is our working together? What's the cadence of our communication? I have had teams agree to, for every email that goes out, reply and say, got it. I'm coming back to you tomorrow, next day, whatever it is. Just reply and say, got it. And that's agree to some protocols for how we're doing our communicating, our engagement with conflict, our decision making, or whatever it is. Because if we just go with what the standard business approach is, that only represents a very small minority. It is the caricature that I was mentioning of how people think and act. And so even things like eye contact. Yeah, if you're from a different culture, then this idea that you're looking away and that means you're shifty, that means it actually could be respect, right? And the just knowing, what do we, us five, it doesn't really matter. We don't even have to be experts on what each person's culture is. What do we together believe our decision making, or navigating difficult, what are we agreeing to? And then refreshing that. And what's hard about it? And what do we need to tweak in it? And keeping that alive for us is important.
And I think also, and I always say this maybe because it's a value that I personally have, is that have a sense of humor. Sometimes I just feel like so many of the team peopling problems are everything's so serious. What's wrong with just saying, hey, it appears that my nose ring is offending you. What's going on with that? You have a thing against nose rings or something? Like, you don't have to be so serious. You could actually laugh at yourself or laugh at the situation and create a lighter sphere for it to take place, where it's not such a serious, this is impacting my work, this is impacting my team, my identity is threatened. And then it's so serious that it becomes an armed conflict instead of coffee and a joke. And not to make light of some of those situations, but I do think that a little element of lightheartedness creates maybe some gray areas that allow all of the things that you were talking about to take place. And I know you have something else to say, Chris, and we're running out of time. So I did want, after Chris, I would like to just point out a few great things that I heard that resonated with me, and then talk about,
comment on the lightheartedness.
Yeah.
That's an element of culture. And so when we try to have people who hold marginalized identities be lighthearted in a culture that has not taken them seriously, then that's harmful to them. On the other hand, when they have been, whether it's policed or otherwise, in very serious ways, the culture is not lighthearted, and then we're asking them to be lighthearted, that's hard. So as a leader like Chris could probably create an environment that's lighthearted and yet also feel serious and focused on the people. People will know that and then respond to that, which is wholly different from asking people to respond in ways that are against the culture that they're actually in. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
I have to say, I really appreciate it, because I was thinking about what I say is I would appreciate if you came to me first. But I'm realizing, like, again, if I think about it, that's my personality. I'd appreciate that. But look, if you're not, then go pick let's get it someone else, and then you can come to me if you're not comfortable doing that. And I think adding that to my thing, I would prefer it this way. But if you're not comfortable with that, then don't go above me. Go and let's go side adjacent. Let's bring a colleague in. And so you have someone else that maybe you feel a little more comfortable with talking to directly. And I think for me, that's a big win. I can immediately take that and implement that. And those are the kind of things I guess I want people to get out of this, is like what we said. And I know you like to recap here is one, I think one of the big things you said is really the whole person, and whether they like to wear colors or not wear colors or no, like for me, it's like, I'm always have just celebrate people winning, and you're going to build some rapport, some trust. And those are the key things that you want. What are little ways that you can build trust? And I think those are really the important, and understand that even though I would prefer like someone to come to me directly, understand that some people will be like, oh God, I'm never doing that. I'll just not say anything. And that's not what I want. I want to make sure that you understand that people are different, and saying, okay, and if you're not comfortable doing that, I appreciate if you went adjacent, pick someone else that you're comfortable with and come talk. And then you can both come talk to me, or go to HR, say, can we have someone in HR? Look, my teammate doesn't feel comfortable with me. Is it okay if he or she comes, gets you, and then we can talk together as the three of us and just make a plan, right? That's what you're getting to, right?
But you know what's even better than what you just said, Chris?
Lay it on me.
Here are the four of us. I would prefer if you could come to me. I know that there might be times when you don't feel comfortable coming to me. What do you think we should do in those times? As a team, let's come up with some strategies for engaging with, because I think people stand behind the things they create. So it's one thing as leaders, we feel we need to tell everybody how the thing needs to go. Every team can create these things for themselves.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's
Right.
beautiful. Thank you.
You've laid some real nuggets on us, Faith. That last one really did a number on us too, is that people stand by what they create. And that speaks to the very first part of our show here, when we were talking about how does a leader get his team to have ownership. And changing your approach to be more inclusive, to ask the questions, don't assume them. Even your ability, our listeners got to see Chris and I both gently being redirected toward a more proper inclusion language and assumptions. And I like that, because that's how it ought to be. A little gentle, a little bit of grace. A couple of other words that you said that landed for me when you said interthink. Immediately that resonated. I don't know if it's a sci-fi word in my mind or whatever, but for some reason it just interthink. Yeah, I'm going to find a way to use that on a regular basis, just so everyone knows.
Collective think. Yeah.
I love it. The second thing is that 80% of the solution is in 20% of the system, and the system change. And when you said that resonated with me. That's powerful, because that's small tweaks, a small steering column steering the entire vehicle. The second, another word or word combination, you said design the environment.
Yeah.
And I love that, because it implies a creativity, a little bit of freedom, but it also is about creating the environment that you want in your company, in your team, in your personal and professional relationships. And when you talked about teamwork, is teaming as a whole set of skills, and work is a whole set of skills. And another nugget that you said was when you were talking about what is the medicine that your team or company offers the world, or your leadership.
Yeah.
And I think we always forget the impact when we focus on the output. So that to me was really powerful. Chris, it's always powerful when you said, don't send that third email, because I am as guilty as the rest of our listeners, I'm sure.
Misinterpret it. But I want to just go back to one other thing that's important. And I think this goes back to your teaming thing. As a leader, one things you want to find is, am I building trust or not building trust? And my job, 1, 2, 3, 4, was it 4 pillars? 4 pillars is how you build trust, and then you build trust, and then you build trust, and then you build trust. And all of a sudden people trust you, and then they're willing to do more for you. I constantly say to people, look, if you berate people, they're not going to be like, hey, I need some help on the weekend. They'll be like, bite me. Why would I want to do that? I don't feel you have my back, and all you're doing is asking me to do this. Now, I suppose if you build a lot of trouble, look, would you be able to work this weekend? I understand that it's busy, but and if you've built up trust and you're like, oh, yes, I will do that. And as long as you don't abuse it, then you get that extra effort from people. And that happens on a regular basis. They're thinking themselves about how can I do better? So what a lovely conversation. So I want to ask one last thing for you is how best were people who are interested to reach out to you?
faithclarke.com, click the button, or send email to faith@faithclarke.com. Whether it's on the team side or the culture side or the individual leader side, I'm happy to help you tweak. Just what's the one small low-hanging fruit that we can move that kind of cascades into the system the way you need.
Yeah. And
Can you spell out your website just
we'll
so that
put in the
people
links,
know?
won't we, in the podcast when we
Okay.
promote it? We'll put all of that in the links for you because look, what a pleasure is all I got to say. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I learned something. I assume the people who are going to listen to this are going to learn something absolutely fantastic. Appreciate you.
So listeners, if you're a member of A² Lamp Group, stick around. We've got even more nuggets coming, I can just tell, in our bonus content, which all of our members get every episode. If you're subscribed, that's great. If you're not, please subscribe, and everyone go out there and mechanize appreciation. So thank you, Faith Clarke. We appreciate you being here. Stick around.
Hi, this is Chris, podcast team coordinator for A² Lamp Groups. Thank you for listening and subscribing to the Stop Digging Community Podcast. Keep the conversation going. Search for the Stop Digging group on LinkedIn and don't miss out on our next episode.